What is it like to be transgender? Is gender the same thing as sex? Why are pronouns important? Photojournalist Sal Skog will share stories and words and pictures to celebrate the extraordinary lives of transgender people. Sal has interviewed and photographed more than 100 people who are trans. Their engaging and deeply moving personal stories illuminate not only what it means to be transgender, but what it means to be human. Sal is joined by Rachel Dwyer, a representative from the trans community, to help answer questions. Sal has more than 30 years of experience as a professional photographer. She has a degree in photojournalism from the University of Minnesota. Her work has appeared in magazines such as Minneapolis St. Paul, Entrepreneur, Sports Illustrated, and newspapers in Minnesota, Washington, and Montana.
All right, well, thank you, Bruce. Nice to see you all here today. As Bruce mentioned, this is our special guest, Rachel Dwyer. And Rachel, you can introduce yourself, and I know she's got...
We have some housekeeping things we have to go over. I am Rachel Dwyer. I've transitioned now about 10 years ago. I did 21 years in the Marine Corps, got out in the civilian sector, still worked logistics, and then I transitioned. Some of the housekeeping we need to do. First thing is trigger warnings. These stories are real from real people. With that comes their real life experience, which include thoughts and discussion of suicide, physical, mental, and sexual abuse. If these are triggers for you, please take care of yourself. Safe place. This is a safe place for honest and frank discussions concerning people who are transgender and those who fall under the transgender umbrella. Argumentative, distasteful, derogatory comments and behaviors will not be tolerated. If you're not here to listen, learn, without creating conflict, please remove yourself from the presentation. I know we're not going to have that issue here, but when we do public, it's actually happened once since I've been with Sal, and so we have that there to kind of roadblock. Questions and answers. The panel is myself today. Sometimes we have 2, 3. We're here to answer your questions and provide you insight to our lives. Please ask questions if you have them, listen and learn, and join in the discussions.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, so I'd like to begin by telling you how I got started in this project, and it started when my 2 girls were young. I didn't know anything about transgender people at the time, but I knew that if they were gay, they could face some extra challenges, and I wanted them to be comfortable in their own skin from a young age. So when my daughter Jamie was in about 3rd grade, I was reading her a book about a princess who didn't want to be a princess and wear frilly dresses. She wanted to be the knight and ride the horse, carry the sword. And I said, you know, Jamie, when that girl grows up, she might want to marry a girl, because some girls marry girls and some boys marry boys. And Jamie said, I want to marry a girl. I said, well, that's great, Jamie. I think that's wonderful. You can if you want. Well, I didn't know if Jamie was going to grow up to be a lesbian or not, but it did motivate me to learn about the LGBTQ community. And when I did, I started learning about transgender people. And I was so impressed with them, with their honesty and their resiliency. And most of all, come on in. Yeah, come on in. Most of all,
there's a chair right up here.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Yeah, welcome.
More chairs.
Yeah.
Most of all, their integrity, because these are remarkable people who've gone on extraordinary journeys just to be who they are. Well, then came a day I'll never forget. I was laying in bed one morning with my husband, John, and I said, I'm going to start photographing transgender people. And when I did, I burst into tears. I just cried hard like a baby. And over the next couple of weeks, every time I told someone about my presentation, I started crying. And I didn't understand it until I asked my counselor. And she said, well, Sal, that's because that's your soul speaking. Being transgender is really hard. And if I can help even one person on that journey and teach others what it means to be transgender, then I'm really happy. So thank you so much for being here today. Sharing these stories with you is a dream come true for me. So I'm even a little teary now. Let's start with Mateo's story. He lives in Minnesota. Oh, there's Jamie. She is a lesbian. She's 20 now. She's out and proud. So here's Mateo. He was assigned female at birth. I remember not feeling right in my body from very early on. I hated it when my mom would put me in dresses or want to do my hair. The night before picture day in the 6th grade, I cut off all my hair and came out as bisexual to my classmates, which booked me a one-way ticket to Bully Lane. Later, when I was just starting confirmation, the teacher told me that based on my sexual preference, I could no longer attend. My mom said I would go to hell, but when my grandpa found out, he marched into that church and said, "God makes no mistakes, and if that's who she says she is, then I believe her." The rest of my family fell in line after that. There's Grandpa. For years, I masked my feelings with drugs and sex. I spiraled into depression and had multiple suicide attempts. I questioned my gender identity, but after I started testosterone, I felt like I finally had the answer every time I looked in the mirror, as facial hair started to grow and my voice began to change. There's all this crap on social media about how trans people are groomers and pedophiles. It just doesn't make any sense. The world needs to see that trans people are living like everybody else. I'm a husband, a dad, a student, I'm employed, and I have kids. I shop at Costco and I go to Starbucks. It's not that we're special. We just want to be treated the same as everyone else. And what we're going to do, I'll read a few stories and then we'll take some questions, read a few stories, take some questions, kind of like that. Okay? This is Oliver, he's 29. He was assigned female at birth. When I was 19, I told my brother I thought I was trans, and he wanted to know why anyone would transition and make themselves a target. I told him, it's not that I want to make myself a target, it's just that I need to be who I'm meant to be. I used to be jealous of men, because men are always taken seriously. I wanted to be confident and powerful, but I was crumbling under the pressure of not being who I was meant to be. I was spiteful. Why did other men get dealt the right hand, but I didn't? Now that I'm a man, people treat me differently. I'm actually respected now, and I get listened to more at work. That's messed up. It shouldn't be like that. Because I've lived on both sides of the coin, it's made me more mindful of how I treat women. I make sure they're heard and supported, because when I was female, I wasn't listened to. And Coulter from Denver. When I was younger, I was frustrated that I couldn't control my gender. I grew up in a super Christian household, and I was pretty close to my mom until I came out as lesbian and later as transgender. That's when the shit hit the fan. My siblings were supportive, but my parents told me, do what you want, but we're not going to support you. You know what the Bible says about gay people. My grandma told me she wouldn't associate with me because she felt being transgender doesn't fall under God's plan. Family is very important to me, so I've built my own chosen family to fill the void. I have a drag dad who took me under his wing. He's very protective of me, and he's been there for me through everything. Everyone in my new family is under the queer umbrella, and we all have dinner together every Monday night. And looky here. I love this story. God doesn't make mistakes. Society does. So listen to me. I may have been born a boy, but I'm not a boy. I'm telling you, I'm trans. When I was in kindergarten, my teacher wouldn't allow me to play house with the girls. She said I could only play with Legos, Lincoln Logs, or the Erector set. I threw such a hissy fit that they had to call my mom to pick me up. Everything changed after that. My mom wouldn't let me wear her jewelry, have stuffed animals, or dress up in her clothes anymore. I had a long career in the Marine Corps. I was married at the time, and when my wife was gone, I'd close the blinds, lock the doors, and dress in her clothes. It was freeing and satisfying, but I knew I would be court-martialed if someone caught me. Eventually, I decided to transition. Fortunately, I had mental toughness from serving in the military. You have to be mentally tough to transition, or it's going to eat you up and spit you out on the other side. When I first transitioned, I was constantly misgendered. I wanted people to see me as a woman, but what they saw was a guy in a dress. It was incredibly frustrating, and it made me angry. After I got top surgery, the misgendering stopped. I recently had bottom surgery. People ask me what that means, and I tell them, think of it this way. They're taking an outie and making an innie. Before I transitioned, there were times when I contemplated suicide. Most of us who are trans have had that barrel in our mouth. I'm glad I didn't do it, though, because I've achieved everything I've imagined. I'm comfortable as I am, I'm living as a woman, and I'm happy, productive, and part of society. My body fits me. I'm finally, fully and completely Rachel, as God meant me to be. This might be a good time for questions. You guys have any? Thoughts?
Tough crowd today.
Bruce?
Yeah. So when someone decides to trans, you're losing a lot of support in family or faith community or otherwise. How do you find the support network to do that, to replace those?
That's a tough one. In a lot of cases, and sadly, the vast majority of cases, depending on the age of the individual, they lose their family support, brother, sister, aunts, uncles. It's getting better. In my case, I lost almost my entire family. The community, the trans community, helps support that, and that's where we get our community from. One of the stories talked about, they have a drag dad. That would be someone in the community that's taken over that aspect and that role for them, and that's very important. More and more churches and religious organizations are starting to understand that, hey, we're humans too, and we still are children of God, so what's the big issue? So we're starting to see a lot more support from the religious communities. Work communities are progressing also. So it is getting better, but the support comes generally from the trans community itself when we lose all the other support.
There is an organization in Boulder, you came to Fraser, I know.
Yes.
Talked to, and what is the name of the?
Out Boulder.
Out Boulder.
Yeah,
And
Out Boulder
that's,
County.
So tell me more about Out Boulder.
Out Boulder is the local LGBTQ support organization. They do a number of things. They're growing a lot. They support the entire LGBTQ community from young kids, young adults, up to full-fledged adults. It's a great organization. They're the ones that organize and oversee the Pride festivals here in Boulder and Longmont. They're expanding out to other areas. That's a great organization.
All right, thank you.
So just one quick one. So we saw so much progress, and now we're seeing in certain areas of the country a huge backlash to that progress. So can you speak to what we all should be doing or how to deal with that, because it's becoming terrifying?
It is very terrifying, no two ways about it. One of my daughters lives in Texas, and she's the daughter that is fully supportive of myself. And we hadn't seen each other in probably 8 years. And so I wanted to surprise her and the grandkids for Christmas. And went down unannounced, had to go through Oklahoma, Texas. And we all know what Oklahoma and Texas feels about this based on the news. I had no issues whatsoever. When I went down, I straight shot it. It was a 12. Maps say it's 11.5-hour drive. I made it about 12 hours and 10 minutes. I made 4 stops, 2 gas stops, 2 additional potty breaks. And in all those, I was going into restrooms to where they were busy, travel paths. I had absolutely no issues.
You know, sometimes it's not quite as bad as the news makes it out to be.
Yeah.
I interviewed a woman in Florida, and when she came out at work, she had to come out not just to her boss and her employees in the office, but to 100 different social services agencies that she partnered with. And across the board, everybody was great, and that was Florida, so, yeah.
So a lot of the problem is there's, as with everything, there's that small faction that makes a lot of noise.
Yeah.
And that's the case, but for trans people, it's extremely scary, extremely upsetting and concerning for us, nonetheless.
Yeah, well, here's a good example of how they're fighting back. These people are so cool, Luna and Chris in Boulder. People think being trans is all about suffering and dysphoria, but for us it's defined more by joy than anything else. We're very deeply in love and tightly bonded. We are trans people loving each other despite a world that tells us we should be sad and alone. Our love is so intense because we share the struggle of being outcast from society. Once we were happily holding hands in a sushi restaurant and a customer used a menu to try to pry our hands apart. There are many people out there who want to tear us apart because they are uncomfortable with our happiness. If you think of love as a candle flame, it can be easily blown out by a simple wind. We experience a lot of transphobia, so our lives are very windy, but our flame doesn't blow out. That's because with a lot of hard work, we've taken the intensity of our love and turned that candle into a lighthouse. We prove society wrong every day, and the life we've built together makes life worth living. Gotta love those guys. They had they had to move. Their neighbors, the one guy would spit in their direction every time he saw them, kick their dogs in the ribs. The kids in the neighborhood threw rocks at them. It was bad. Yeah, I think it was in Boulder. Yeah. And Lemmy was assigned female at birth. From first grade, I knew I wanted to be a man and that I liked girls. I had a crush on my second grade teacher, Miss Kelly. I thought if I wore boys' clothes to school, Miss Kelly would like me more. I met my wife when we were in college before I transitioned. When we first met, she didn't know if I was a guy or a girl, but she said it didn't matter because she liked me so much. After I transitioned, she saw me as a man. She always tells me, "You're my big, strong man," and I say, "That's right, baby, that's right." When I transitioned, I got an insane amount of confidence. It was really exciting. People were seeing me as a man, and that's all I really wanted, to be respected for who I am. I was afraid to tell my friends I was trans. I thought I would be laughed at, and I was worried that my friends would be embarrassed to be seen with me. But when I told my best friend, Devontae, he said, "I don't care if you're purple, green, or blue. I love you for who you are. I'm still going to call you Sugar, though." My family has supported me throughout the past 4 years, but this is foreign territory to my mom, and she's still having a hard time adjusting. As for me, I'm really at peace with myself. And Kat. I came out 3 years ago when I was 8. I felt like I was in the wrong body, and it made me anxious. I told my parents that I felt like a girl, not a boy. They were perfectly fine with it because my mom is bisexual and my other parent is trans. It was harder to tell my school because I thought people would be mad and tell me I shouldn't be trans. When I did come out, most of the kids were pretty good about it, but this one kid is real homophobic, and he told me that since I was trans, I would go to hell. It made me really mad, so I told him to piss off.
This is a church, you know.
It did cross my mind. Oh, and this is Evelyn. I'm so excited because Evelyn used to work at 3M and she just got me a connection there. I'm going to be speaking to the employees of 3M in April at the company headquarters, and they're going to stream it to Target, Best Buy, and Ecolab. So I'm pretty excited about that. So this is Evelyn's story. This is Evelyn today. When I met her last summer in St. Paul, when she was 21, she met her future wife. So Evelyn was assigned male at birth, and that's Evelyn's wife. When I was 21, I met my future wife, and I came out to her a month after we met. It was 1980 and the term transgender didn't exist. I told her I was a transvestite, even though it didn't feel quite right. She asked me what name I wanted to use, and when I heard her call me Evelyn, I knew it was right. Eventually, I started dressing as a woman on the weekends, but stopped when I started teaching martial arts. The kids looked up to me, and I didn't think I would be a good role model if they were to see me as the person I truly was. I suppressed my feelings and just stopped being me. I sought help from a therapist because my heart wanted to transition, but my mind wouldn't go along. The therapist told me that I wasn't a good candidate for transition and to, quote, put those thoughts away. At the time, there was something called gatekeeping, and they wouldn't consider you for transitioning if you weren't the epitome of stereotypical femininity. 10 years later, I found a more knowledgeable therapist, and within a session or two, I was diagnosed with gender dysphoria. After decades of suppression, I finally heard what I wanted to hear, but it still took me a couple of months and more sessions with my therapist to finally admit to myself that I needed to transition. By then, I'd been married for 38 years, and my wife was dying of cancer. When I told her I wanted to live full-time as a woman, there were a lot of tears, and she gave me her blessing and said, "I know it's something you have to do. I just wish you my best." When I started hormones, I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized was there. And when my insurance company approved my bottom surgery, I cried tears of joy. When I came out, friends I'd known for decades said they saw the real me. They saw my happiness and they saw my freedom. I used to have to work at smiling for photos, but now smiling seems to come naturally for me, in photos and in life. She's had over 300 hours of electrolysis. Doesn't she look great? And Leo. When I was younger, I lived my life as a tomboy, so Leo was assigned female at birth. In high school, I felt like I needed to be a boy, but I didn't know how to be a boy. When I joined the Air Force, I felt awkward as hell to be in the female barracks. I felt so out of place. Once I had to wear a skirt as part of our uniform, and I hated it. I never felt so uncomfortable in my life. I was afraid to transition because I thought I might be kicked out with a dishonorable discharge and lose all my benefits. But in 2016, the Obama administration lifted the military's ban on openly serving transgender troops. I transitioned and I was surprised and extremely blessed to be treated the same as all the other guys. I'm supported all the way around, 360 degrees. My mama always told me, closed mouths don't get fed. If you have something to say, go ahead and say it, even if the whole world is against you. I don't go around telling people I'm trans, but if I hear someone talking about trans people in a negative way, I'll speak up. You can only go so far with some people though, because some folks just don't want to learn. Any thoughts or questions? Well, let's do Erides. She's from Lafayette. I was driving for DoorDash and customers were calling me sir. I had no idea why that made me so uncomfortable, but it did. Around that time, I was seeing trans-related posts popping up on Reddit, and I began connecting the dots. I started to question whether or not I was trans. I went to a thrift store and picked out some skirts and dresses to see what it would be like to wear women's clothes. It was scary to think people might be watching me. As soon as I put on a skirt, I looked in the mirror and said to myself, yeah, okay, I'm trans. The puzzle pieces finally fit together. I was filled with feelings of euphoria, happiness, joy, and excitement. I spun around so that the skirt twirled around my legs and I thought, oh my gosh, holy shit, this is amazing. Later, I shaved my beard and grew my hair. Long hair gives me some of the best gender euphoria ever. I never had any internalized transphobia, so I moved quickly in my transition. My family is very positive and accepting. My parents bought me hormones for my 19th birthday, and when I turned 20, my mom gave me a gold diamond ring that's been passed down to 5 generations of women in our family. You know, there are a lot of supportive families out there, not all of them, and a lot of them are definitely not, but there's plenty of people who did have good family members.
How big is the trans community? You're from Longmont, say, so how big is it there, and do we know how big it is in Boulder?
As far as how many people out there, I don't have the current statistics. I know, I looked at the VA once, and as I recall, just in actual VA, there's over 300,000 people identify trans within the VA, Veterans Administration community that are seeking help. So it's quite large, and a lot of the people you have no idea are trans.
Yeah.
They blend so well, so nicely. You just don't.
Mm-hmm. Especially trans men. You know, I've interviewed, out of 100 people, I've probably interviewed 20 trans women who are over 50, but I've never interviewed a trans man over 50. And my guess is that they can pass, and they don't want to fuss with it. If they can pass, why out yourself? Because it's hard. But I've interviewed lots of trans men under 40, so they're more willing to step up and speak out because they want things to change and they feel safer to do so.
So when you say trans man, is that a woman that became a man or a man that became a woman?
Yeah,
The man is what you ended up as.
Right.
So you're
So trans
identified,
man-
assigned female at birth, and then you transition to a man.
Okay.
Yeah. 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 Here's, speaking of passing, I guess this is Jenna, and Jenna had facial feminization surgery. You guys ever heard of that? So men tend to have a bigger brow. If you look above their eyes, it kind of juts out a little bit more, and women's is a little more flatter. So she had that. She had her nose and her hairline. She had body sculpting and breast augmentation. She works at the VA. And here's before and after with the facial feminization surgery. Yeah.
An Adam's apple under that.
Yeah.
yeah, they can do the trach shave.
Yeah. Did
You
you
still
ever
have one.
consider more surgeries or?
There are some aspects that I would like as far as surgery goes. However, the cost of it and insurance, I do have some good insurance. However, the there's a limit to what that insurance will cover.
She lives in Minnesota, and she ended up sort of falling into a job at the University of Minnesota and discovered that it covered that. Yeah, Minnesota has good benefits.
See, even though I work for CU, my medical benefits do not cover that type of procedure. They'll cover augmentation, bottom surgery, medications, but there's a limit to what they will or will not cover.
Yeah. Let's talk about, oh, here she is again. Here's Quinn. I knew when I was 5 that I was completely different than most kids. I secretly wanted girl clothes, like cute blouses and jelly shoes. It didn't feel right to wear boy pants and plaid shirts. I knew I was a girl trapped in a boy's body. I was bullied and made fun of from kindergarten through high school. I was called every derogatory name possible. I had to hide my feelings from everybody, and I didn't have a lot of friends. In my 30s, I was in a dark place from all the bullying and not feeling accepted or loved, and I tried to commit suicide in 2014. Now I'm grateful to be living authentically and freely as a trans Latina woman. There's a lot of transphobia out there, especially towards trans women of color. I hope to educate others that it's okay to be different. I want people to know it's okay if they don't understand what it means to be trans. I want them to learn and know it's okay to ask questions. Questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
I'm LGBTQ, I understand. And then recently there's been some other number 1, number 2,
IA.
IA, and I don't know what those mean.
Intersex is the I.
Intersex, asexual,
Okay.
Do you know what intersex means?
No.
It means you're born with both parts, both sexual. Yeah, you're kind of a mix of both.
both reproductive
Yeah.
glands, basically.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's do Kiernan. His story is pretty powerful. He was assigned female at birth. I've always liked girly things like makeup and dressing up, but once puberty hit, being one of the girls felt icky and so wrong. My friends were so excited about puberty and I was not. High school was hard. I developed bad acne and I saw myself as an ugly, grotesque monster. In fact, here's a self-portrait that he did in high school. I thought no one would ever want to have sex with me. I still struggle with my self-image, and seeing a proper future for myself feels harder and harder because trans people are so often representative in a negative light. I never feel like I belong in public restrooms. It feels like everyone is watching me, and I'm afraid I'll be harassed. If I enter a restroom and there's only one man in there, I'll leave because there wouldn't be any witnesses if something were to happen to me. High school locker rooms are 100% worse. I would always change in the stall, afraid someone would kick in the door, and I was in constant fight or flight mode. If I'm good at one thing, it's being vulnerable. I'm an open book. I went through a phase where I felt like I wanted a penis or I wanted death. But now I'm getting to a point where I just don't care. The penis is not what makes a man, and people who meet me will know that. I did call him last week, because this was a year ago I interviewed him, and he's doing great. He's got a boyfriend, and he's really happy, and I was really glad to hear that. And Emmett. Emmett was assigned female at birth. I felt like a zoo animal in the small town I grew up in. It seemed like the whole town was talking about me, because they had never known a queer person before I came along. Everyone was intrigued by me, but not in a polite way. They didn't listen to understand. They listened so they could talk shit about me. It was very dehumanizing. I decided to wear a tuxedo to prom one year, and I invited a girl to go with me. It was the talk of the town. When the school found out, they sent a letter saying that if I wore the tuxedo to prom, I'd be suspended. My mom cried. She was scared and didn't want me to go. But I wanted to pave the way for the people that would come after me. When I arrived at the dance wearing the tuxedo, everybody cheered and broke into applause, and the principal actually apologized. My mom has definitely been my backbone through everything. We're very close. She doesn't have a judgmental bone in her body. She always says, whatever makes you happy, that's what I want. She believes in me more than I believe in myself. Everybody needs a person like that in their life, you know? When I was afraid to transition, someone told me, you're still going to be cute and you're still going to be loved. You're going to be happier than ever, so don't worry about how you're going to look, because happiness is what looks good on people. Now I live in St. Pete, Florida, and to find this welcoming community has been a saving grace for me. And now that I'm seeing changes from hormones, I've kind of fallen in love with myself. Do you guys know Reverend Nicole? Oh, she's from Louisville. I was the oldest son in a Roman Catholic Latino family, and I really felt the pressure to uphold the family name. I prayed for God to fix me because I wanted to be the man everyone told me I was. I had to macho up, so I got a job in law enforcement. I was trying to look like a man, but when I put the uniform on, it was like putting on a facade. I became disillusioned, surly, and discontented. Drinking was the only way I could cope. I had everything I was supposed to have, a wife, a beautiful house, 2 cars, and respect on the job, but I was on the verge of suicide. Why was I so miserable? I found a therapist and figured out I was trans. I was 43 when I told my mom. She feared I would lose my family, my friends, and my job. She thought I would end up alone in a seedy motel, drinking myself to death, but that's not what happened. Instead, I earned a master's degree in counseling, and I've worked with hundreds of trans people. When you hear over and over that you are worthless and broken, you start to believe it. I help my clients realize that the problem isn't them, the problem is with the people telling them they're worthless. I can empathize with my clients because I understand what it's like to go through a second puberty, and I know how insanely difficult it is to come out to family. I've heard somebody scream faggot at me from a car window, and I've watched a pack of high school boys walking toward me, wondering if they were going to kill me. In my 50s, I earned a Master of Divinity. I'm an ordained pastor, a leader in the progressive Christian movement, and I serve on the National LGBTQ Task Force. Lauren didn't have such a good church experience. Lauren is from Loveland. She was assigned male at birth. I was married with a young son, and my wife came home one day and caught me wearing a wig, a dress, and high heels. I was mortified and scared to death. Everything spilled out, and I told her that I'd always wanted to be a woman. She was angry and said, "How could you do this to me? How could you do this to our son?" She became cold and distant and filed for divorce a month later. For the next 2 years, I struggled being on my own. I had an enormous sense of guilt for being transgender and for breaking up my family. I joined a church. I thought that if I were devoted to the church and got things right with God, then I'd be cured and I wouldn't be transgender anymore. The pastor agreed with me and said, "Don't worry, we'll find you a wife." He told me to keep busy so I wouldn't have a chance to be trans or think about who I was. I remarried and tried to be a good husband, but I felt like I was faking it. I played the part, but it always felt forced. My wife took advantage of my challenges and became emotionally abusive. When I sought help from the pastor, he didn't acknowledge the abuse, and he shifted all the blame to me because I was trans. I ended up leaving the marriage and the church, and I still suffer some PTSD to this day. All my life, I was never happy with who I saw in the mirror, but I didn't realize it until I started to transition. Now I see a sparkle in my eyes that wasn't there before, and I'm very happy. I'm healing, and I don't feel guilty anymore. I'm looking for a better, progressive church. The church should be a place to find community and solace, but what I found was judgment. How you guys doing out there? It's intense, isn't it? This is Park Schilling, his high school portrait, 1961. I didn't transition until I was 68. I waited until my whole family died off. If I had come out before then, everybody would have gone completely zonkers, and it would have put an end to Christmas and everything else. Back then they were beating up gays, and you didn't even go to jail for doing it. I would have loved to have been able to come out at 14, but I would have gotten killed. If a kid back then started dressing as a girl, you'd probably find a body. That even happens today. That's why we have the Transgender Day of Remembrance. Before I came out, I played the part of the macho man. I bloodied my knuckles on a lot of guys, but I never peed standing up, even in the military. It just didn't feel natural. It was kind of good that I waited to come out, because when I did, it started a whole new life for me. It was a struggle, but a happy struggle. The first night I threw out all my men's clothes. After 2 months on hormones, I felt like I was 68 going on 14, and I started dressing like a girl. I started dressing like a 14-year-old girl too. That cute little outfit with the pink dress and the pink fringe panties, oh my God, yes. Now I'm finally free to wear whatever I want and do whatever I want. I'm trans. If people don't like it, I don't give a crap. My love life hasn't gone so well though. I try to remember the good times when I did have a partner. I had a girlfriend once and we were really meant for each other. Not to brag, but our love life would go on for hours. like an idiot, I told her who I really was, and she couldn't handle it. I haven't had a partner in over 40 years. Sometimes I get so lonely that I get suicidal. I've been crying so much that I need to buy some doggone stock and Kleenex so I can get my money back. Ellie, she's a superstar. At the time I transitioned, I owned a law firm representing some major national firms. I wrote a letter to my clients explaining what it means to be trans. I asked them not to fire me, but they did, and I had to close the firm. At the time, trans people weren't very visible, so I started speaking at churches and other small venues. I wrote a memoir and built a new business, and now I go across the country speaking about human inclusivity. I've given more than 1,000 talks since 2009. I teach people how to be welcoming and accepting to anyone who is different. She's also on the school board in her small town in Minnesota.
So it sounds like you've been all over the country. How do you find people to interview?
First I went to I volunteered to be the photographer at a Grip and Grin for a organization that provides mental health services to LGBTQ people, so I met some people there and I just said, hey, I'm doing this project, do you know anyone who's trans? And they're like, yeah, I'm trans, I'll do it. And then I started asking people, if people know people, and then social media, of course. People started coming to me now, wanting me to interview them.
What's a grip and grin?
Oh, you show up and you stand in front of the backdrop and you smile and they take your picture. Or you shake hands and smile. Yeah, you grip and grin. Yeah. It hasn't been hard. People want change. Things are changing. And if you speak up, things change.
Yeah, just in the time that I've transitioned, I've seen such a profound change. Still have a long way to go. There's still a lot of hate out there. Sad, but it's the truth. And hate just isn't towards necessarily trans people. It's just generalized hate. If you happen to be trans, you get a more vicious version of it.
Yeah. What time do we have till lose?
Let's go to 5 to 10. Our
Okay.
service starts down the other end of the church.
Okay.
A question about pronouns,
Uh-huh.
and now there's a they, them, and what does that, what are they trying to tell me? What are they, them?
Pronouns are really, really important. I'm very fortunate where I work. I very seldom get misgendered. The they, them pronouns, she, her, he, him, pretty simple. Trans man wants to be referred to as he, him. Myself, trans woman, wants to be referred to as she, her, ma'am. I'm not a sir. If someone calls me sir, I will let them know.
Yes.
It happens, face to face it seldom happens anymore, on the phone it does a lot. But the they, them is for those that are non-binary. They don't fall under the standard spectrum of feeling like they're a definitive man or a definitive woman. They're somewhere in between gender. Gender for them is not the same as it is for myself or for you. And so it's non-binary, and they, them are a non-binary. The non-binary is non-gender, non-sexual. It's just them, a way to refer to the person as a pronoun without being gender specific.
One of the mom friends I had when our kids were in like middle school, their daughter wanted to go to summer camp but didn't want to go to the girls' cabins because she didn't feel like she was a girl, but she didn't want to go to the boys' cabin either. And that, I thought, was a good way to, she's neither man nor woman, she's kind of in between, not binary. Because binary means two, one or the other. Yeah. Does that help understand?
Well,
I can read a few.
is it, when do they, I just can't imagine, they decide what from day to day, whether.
No. See, we're conditioned to believe that gender is one or the other. We all grew up that way.
yes.
You're a boy or a girl, that's the end of the story. That's just not true.
Okay.
Gender's on a spectrum, and some people fall more in the middle. So they don't identify as one or the other, they feel they're some of both. Yeah.
So it's not plural, because
Yeah,
them
it
is
is-
usually
Oh, well, it is.
plural, right? If
It
you
is
talk
plural,
about
it
they,
is
it's-
plural, it is plural, because there's some of both. They're a mix of both.
But they're not, oh, okay.
Yeah,
The they, them is a plural pronoun,
Right, that's what I'm thinking
which
of.
makes it non-gender. That's why they use the non-binary people, because it's not a gender-specific pronoun. It can be either and or,
Okay.
they as a group. They could be all guys, they could be all girls,
I'm gonna
but
skip.
or it could be a mix, so it's they or them.
So when they get in the morning, what do they put on, what do they wear?
Here,
Just whatever they want?
I'm gonna read a couple,
Yeah,
these
have
people,
you got some-
yeah.
So they're not saying they have multiple personalities?
No.
No, no,
Not at
no,
all,
That's
not at all.
what.
no, it's their gender.
multiple-
Here, I've got a couple stories here, these two people, I think, kind of explained it pretty well.
Good, thank you.
I can find them.
Um,
Oh yeah, here, let's listen to Rainier. This is Rainier. Around age 12, I started having inklings that something wasn't right. Was I more masculine than feminine? Did I want to be a man? I didn't have any words to describe what I was feeling, so I decided I must just be weird. I tried to keep the facade up, but my classmates noticed I was different, and I endured a variety of slurs from them. When I was 23, I saw the word non-binary on a computer screen, and I thought, oh, that exists? That's a real thing? Hey, that's me! Clearly, this meant that someone else has had this experience. I was so relieved it felt like I dropped a big weight that I'd been carrying around for years. Sometimes I get weird looks when I tell people my pronouns are they, them. One man asked if it meant I had schizophrenia.
Yeah.
Society tells us there are two genders and people want to fit me into one or the other. I like it when people are confused about my gender because it leads to a conversation where I can explain who I actually am. Non-binary means no attachment to the binary genders. I feel like I'm neither gender most of the time. I don't want to be perceived as either a man or a woman. I find it very peaceful and I feel free.
So it sounds like we need a new pronoun though.
Well, the new pronoun is they, them.
Well,
there
there's
are-
an existing pronoun that
there
means
are-
multiple.
There are, it's
And so it sounds like
Zer,
we need a new pronoun.
there's Z's,
Z's,
Zer,
thems,
and EM, yeah, there are pronouns.
Yeah.
And what are those pronouns?
It
About
kind of means
what does
they,
that
them,
mean?
same.
They're just, and I
Non-binary.
don't know where they developed from, but these are additional non-binary pronouns that are not they, them.
Yeah.
It's
Okay,
zero.
so it means it's
Means
for
they.
people who are non-binary.
Still
Yeah,
a
it's
non-binary
plural.
style pronoun.
Yeah,
Can
let's
you help
hear,
us understand gender orientation versus sexual orientation? Or gender identity
right,
versus,
sexual orientation, okay, so I've interviewed 100 people, never once have I asked them what their sexual orientation is. I've never said, are you gay or straight? That's sexual orientation, and the reason I haven't, because we're only talking about gender. And gender is who you go to bed as, it's who you are. Your sexual preference is who you go to bed with. Okay?
That's a really good way to put it.
Yeah, yeah. Let's hear, this is a really enlightening one too. This is
Oh,
Laszlo.
this one's great.
Yeah. I don't have a gender. I call myself gender void because none of the boxes fit. I don't identify with being male, female, masculine, or feminine, and I never understood womanhood, even when I was living through the lens of a girl. When I was younger, I didn't have language to describe myself. I always felt so uncomfortable and embarrassed because I didn't know how to fit in. I knew I wasn't a girl, but I also knew I wasn't a boy. I didn't know what the other girls were going through because I wasn't like them. When I was 20, I plugged into a local queer community. It was eye-opening to be surrounded by trans and gender diverse people, and it was exciting to realize there was a whole world outside of the binary that I was allowed to explore. It feels so honest and freeing to live outside of society's expectations in such a big way, but sometimes it feels like I'm coming across as a crazy person. It's hard for people to wrap their heads around how much I don't relate to socialized gender. It's hard to be perceived as genderless in a society that is so heavily gendered. During the pandemic, I grew my hair long, and some customers at work told me how pretty it was. I knew I was being perceived as a pretty girl, and it made me very uncomfortable. That night, I went home and shaved my hair off. I've kept it shaved ever since. I liked my long hair, but I don't like being perceived as a girl. Transgender means you don't identify with the gender you were assigned at birth. Cisgender means you do. I've always felt at home in my body, and I love the skin I'm in. I don't have body dysphoria, but when people perceive me as a girl, I get social dysphoria. I didn't transition because there was nothing to transition to. I've just come around to understanding my identity. And her parents like, can't you just be gay? They even, she sent them the they them guide to pronouns and they wouldn't read it. Yeah. For dummies, yeah, it was for dummies, yeah.
That comment really speaks to so many people, and especially society as a whole, wants to put a label on us. You know? And that's where a lot of the problems come in.
And listen to Doug
Yeah.
for a second here. I don't like gender labels. They take away my identity as a human. They put me in a box. I feel like I've lived in boxes for so long and it's exhausting. I just like to exist. So there you have it.
And for those of you that are really, just can't grasp the non-binary, don't feel too bad about it. I'm one of the people is, non-binary is still very confusing to me, and I do have some non-binary friends. Their pronouns are much more difficult. There's nothing to indicate. So don't feel too bad about that. It's difficult to really understand till you really get into it and learn about it and educate yourself.
Here's one. Oh yeah, go ahead. Here's another one.
Yeah. Does a person's gender identity change over time? Is it fluid?
Once they figure it out, probably not. I've known a couple of people that have considered themselves gay, and then as they learn and they've evolved and grow and mature, they go, well, no, I'm not really gay, I'm trans, and they've actually transitioned.
But I think you're right. Once you figure it out, you kind of
Yeah,
know. Yeah.
there's a shuffling or a change, however you want to term that, in the process. For me personally, I thought I was a bisexual. And then it progressed, and I go, wait a minute, no, it's not, that's not necessarily the case. And through a lot of time, I finally figured it out that I fit more as trans, and I'm much more comfortable in the female role.
But that was figuring out your own identity.
Yeah, so some people, they're gay, and through the process, they migrate, but once they get it totally figured out, they're pretty much set there.
Yeah. And most people, you know what your gender identity is at around age 3, I think. Yeah, if you think back, when did you know you were a boy or a girl? You're pretty little, you kind of know. And here's Levi, he also has perspective on this. There are stages to growing up. I feel like a boy, not a man. I can pass as male, but there is a whole masculine culture which I have a hard time learning because I wasn't conditioned to be male from a young age. I'm a gender neutral person. I go by male pronouns, but I don't deny my feminine energy. Right? Theodore. Not feeling comfortable in my body felt like being slowly suffocated. If I hadn't transitioned, I would be dead. Now with every gender affirming action I take, I feel like I'm breathing the freshest air in the world. It's a beautiful experience. Isn't he darling? Let's have time for a few more. Yes?
Do either of you have specific suggestions for a community like ours to continue along on our welcoming pathway?
A lot of organizations ask that question, and the only thing I can say to you is keep going out there and learning. Get as much information as you can. Learn how to be a good ally. Learn how to support. I recently came across a friend of mine was doing some stuff, and they're talking about presenting, man, woman, or presenting as, and I found that quite offensive. It was an inclusive organization, and why was presenting bothered me so much? Because as a trans person, if the only choice I have is presenting, where do I fall? And especially for a very young person or someone that's just in the transition process, there's a lot of questioning. and things like that can really, even though trying to be inclusive, there's things like that that make those of us that are transitioning wonder. You know, it didn't, personally, I wasn't offended, I didn't have a problem with it, but looking at other trans people could have the problem with it. So learn how to be a good ally. Be very supportive, get out and be involved in organizations and events that are trans inclusive.
Okay.
You could also join the Human Rights Campaign, HRC, and they work with politicians, and they're a major source that promotes LGBTQ equality.
Yeah,
Good to
here
know.
locally you have out Boulder, in Denver, one of the
Center on Colfax.
the Center on Colfax, I think that's probably the biggest one. And all these organizations will provide training, they'll come in and talk to you, they have a number of different programs. So that's some of the resources you can go to.
And you can talk to your friends and family like I've been doing a lot of times now when I'm out and about. I'll just say, hey, do you know if any who's trans? You know, it's a way to kind of normalize it and just say, oh yeah, I had this presentation at my church. You're just talking amongst people. It just it normalizes it, and that's important.
Okay.
So, I teach college and we have to ask every semester for pronouns.
Mhm.
And so, so I try to be very sensitive. Let me just ask you this, so if a trans person has she, her pronouns, is it okay, and a female name, is it okay to refer to them as a woman,
Yes,
to make that assumption?
yeah, because they're letting you know that their pronouns are she, her. She, her are a female pronoun, therefore they identify as a female. Woman is female.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, one other way, if you guys know of any other places that would host our presentation, that's another thing you can do that would help us move this forward. We just have a couple minutes. I have one last little short story. It's Torben. It kind of ends on a positive note. I really like Torben. Hey, I'm Torben, and that's my sweet sister Allison giving me a bear hug. Transitioning is hard because there are so few trans role models, and it's not like you get a sign that says, hey dude, you're trans. For me, it was more of a slow internal journey. Being trans is scary as hell before you understand how amazing it is. We can talk all day about the struggles, legal battles, and violence that the trans community experiences, but for me, that's not what being trans is about. We need to be celebrating trans joy and love, because that joy and love is what's going to propel us to make change. Trans joy is the energy we need to make things different. Any more questions? It looks like it's 5-2, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very welcome.